Hi, Becca. Thank you so much for joining me today. Like Amir is having some challenges connecting to our audio, and then we'll get started. Well, Amir, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I hope you can. And Becca, I hope you can hear me too. Thank you so much for joining me for Changemakers Nonprofit Book Club meeting this month for November. We're going to be chatting about the Little Book of Gold, fundraising. Oh, my background is messing it up. Fundraising for small and very small nonprofits. Hope you had a chance to read over it. Well, that's okay, Becca. I'm sorry it's loud. I hope you'll be able to chime in and whenever you get a chance. And that's no problem if it's loud. It looks like it's right now it's just the three of us on here, and people can join at any time, but it's no problem if there's a little bit of background. It's surprisingly quiet where I am. Usually there's background noise, so don't feel bad about that at all. I would love to have you both share with me just kind of what you liked about this book. I can go ahead and get started. And I enjoyed this book. I have a background. Actually, I'd love to hear your background too of how you came into this book, what interested you about this book. But my background is mostly in small to mid-sized nonprofits. I wouldn't say very small. I've never started my own nonprofit, but I have worked for small organizations that, as I was reading through this book, it was kind of a refresher and sort of, reminiscing about my time at those smaller nonprofits where it may have just been me and one other person doing fundraising. And I felt like the author really presented it very succinctly in a way that kind of like all this stuff had been in the back of my mind from my experience of doing it, but I had never articulated it. And I felt like he did a really great job of articulating things that I had experienced. Anybody else want to chime in? I really liked how this was a sort of felt like a field guide, right? Like something that you could just kind of keep in your bag and keep on your desk and as a reference as you move forward, particularly if you are in a nonprofit that's smaller and maybe in early stages, or like the one that the author described, I forget what, small town historical society, where you're just really diving into strategic fundraising campaigns. I felt like there were several points of this book that you should tab and then flip back to when you're like, okay, well, how do we set up a board giving campaign, or how do we set up a major gifts ask? Like, what are some things I should say? And I felt like those were really good resources in there. um I'd love to hear what you didn't like about the book, or things that you felt like could have been maybe revised a little bit based on your experience. For me, I am a grammar nerd, and I feel like there were so many typographical errors in this book that it was distracting at some points. And maybe it was just my copy. I don't know. I got mine on Amazon, and it says in the back that it was printed in October 2023. So I don't know. It wasn't long before I bought it. So I don't know. Maybe it was put together quickly, but there were lots of duplicate paragraphs in mine that I would read it and I think, wait, I just read that like two pages before. So I don't know, if that's something that is as distracting for you as it is for me, but I kept catching me up. But in general, I really liked the book. There wasn't anything content wise that I felt like was, not relevant to my experience or anything. I really felt like he did a good job of presenting things in a positive light when it could have really been easy to swing into, if you feel like fundraising is so hard and fundraising isn't something that you're comfortable with, it can be really easy to portray that negatively. So I think he did a really good job of putting a positive spin on it to make it feel attainable. And y'all feel free to jump in at any time. By all means, do not want to be a lecturer today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
So I have to admit, I completely forgot. Like I put it in my Amazon cart and never hit purchase. So I ordered the book on Monday this week. Have not had a chance to read it yet, but I didn't want to miss discussion on the back end.
Yeah.
A very small, very brand new nonprofit we turned for this year. So I apologize if I don't have a lot of feedback, but I didn't want to miss a great discussion today.
Yeah, no, four is good. I think that's kind of where, the rubber hits the road, right?
Right.
Where you're like, are we going to be able to maintain this long term? You're probably past the bootstrapping phase. Hopefully we're getting
Yes.
close to that and really starting to get, at least from my side of things, from grant writing, really to the point where you can really start being competitive for grants, and that can just take the organization to the next level. So I think you'll love this book. I think you may be a little bit further along, not knowing where you are as far as your fundraising strategies go, but it feels like, you may get to some points and be like, oh, okay, yeah, we're doing this right. We've been doing it this way, or, here's a new spin on it, but I think you'll really like it.
I love that. We set some very ambitious goals for next year.
Mm-hmm.
So any kind of anything helps at this point.
Yep. And he talks about that in the book too, about how to take those goals. And I'm jumping ahead here and we can talk about it in a minute, but how to take those goals and kind of break them down. And that was another one of those things that that I had kind of inherently learned how to do from other people in 15 years of doing nonprofit fundraising. Actually probably more than that, but I won't date myself any further than that. But kind of just inherently learned how to do. And when he breaks it down, like, that is so clear how he does it. And like I said, that it's really something that I think you'll put on your desk and be able to reference as you build all these campaigns. The book is broken up into 2 parts, and then there's a summary after each part, and then a summary at the end. In the first part, he talks about a year of development and how to plan out that year, taking what you've already done with fundraising and building on it. And I really liked that concept because I think so many times nonprofits that I talk to in my work as a grant writer and in my time before doing that too, I think so many nonprofits will kind of have shiny object syndrome. Like they'll see this really big, wonderful event that another organization is doing and think, "Ooh, I want to do that too." That looks fun. And that looks like we could get some new faces in and we could get some new donors and a lot of money out of that. And on the surface, it looks like that. But for a smaller nonprofit, and he particularly talks about this, that can be almost kind of dangerous because you may bite off more than you can chew and end up spending more than you raise. And so I feel like there's a lot of times where you can do that or see a certain campaign that a nonprofit in town is doing and want to jump on it. But if you really are starting out and you take the things that you are doing now and just add sort of that level of strategy to it and a plan behind it, that those existing fundraising revenue streams can really be transformational for you. And then you can continue to build on them year after year. I really liked how he did that and how he started small. He started really close to home at the beginning. He talks about things that you kind of need to understand as you move into really strategic fundraising, things like, you have to know about the donor bill of rights. And that's something I think that people that are new to fundraising in general or nonprofits in general aren't really aware of, but knowing what the expectations are for your nonprofit to your donors, and also knowing what your donors can ask of you. Those strings attached gifts, like how far can they go with that? So there's things in the donor bill of rights that cover that, and so having an understanding of that is important. And saving any excess funding you get this year that you didn't plan on having, instead of thinking, oh, well, we've got an extra $3,000, let's spend it right now, well, on something new. Well, he talks about how that can get you in that endless cycle of living, fundraising perspective. Instead of like paycheck to paycheck, you're living donation to donation. And if you can set some of that aside so that you wait till next year, you're kind of always setting yourself up to be in the plus. I thought that was really helpful. In chapter 2, he talks about board giving and getting that, getting over that culture of, do you have a working board? And I use working board in quotations, a board that considers themselves an extension of the staff. And that can be tricky in the new phases of a nonprofit where, you've invited people to your board who maybe have a personal connection to you, because you needed to have a board in order to get that designation from the IRS. And they may not be aware of or comfortable with what the expectations of an actual functioning, governing, advising board of directors is for a nonprofit. So I've worked at nonprofits where we've had to shift that mindset where the board considers themselves a working board. So they come on and they want to strategize and they want to brainstorm and they want to suggest things for the staff to do and actually do some of that themselves. And they're not making financial contributions. They're not engaging the community to advance the organization. They're not really doing governance oversight. So we had to change that culture. And that's hard because you're going to lose people. You're going to have people step off because they don't want to be part of that. They don't want to give money. They don't want to raise money. And then you're going to have people that are going to, kind of, for lack of a better term, be a little bit of a thorn in your side about it, but they're not going to leave. And so they're going to force you to have to ask them to leave. And those are tough conversations to have. But when you're thinking about it from the future betterment of your organization, they're important. So he talks about that. And that the board of directors should be the most committed to your organization's success. And that's a direct quote from chapter 2. And this is really critical for all fundraising levels and all different types of fundraising, particularly though grant writing. Most grant makers are going to ask what percentage of your board makes a contribution, and you should never say anything less than 100%. He talks about that in this book too, but that's something that I have to talk to nonprofits about a lot. And just thinking about it from the perspective of, these are the people that should be closest to your mission, closest to your work. And if they are not contributing a financial contribution beyond just their time and their talent, then how can we ask a room full of complete strangers at a foundation, maybe across the country, to do so? So it's really important to make sure that not only do they give, but that they know that they're expected to give. And that's a conversation for the executive director and the chair of the board to have with everybody. And when they come on, or at this point right now, if it's something that you're moving into, but he talks about how important that is. I really liked that he broke down the steps that Linda, our hypothetical nonprofit executive director, goes through to basically build and launch a board campaign. And I really think they're really practical steps that are usable, and even like direct quotes from what he shared in the book could be easily translated for anybody's nonprofit. So I thought that was really helpful. And I thought this was a really important point too that he made on page 21. He says, notice Linda didn't ask for ideas to increase giving. A board meeting is not the place to transform fundraising or to brainstorm fundraising ideas. Sorry. And it can be so easy to go down the rabbit hole with that in a board meeting where you've got this room full of people who all think they have great ideas, and you could just get lost in the weeds. And your role is to present the plan. And he goes through that. And this is where you can shift out of that working board mindset too. You're no longer coming to them and saying, hey, how do we accomplish this? You're coming to them and saying, this is how we're going to accomplish this. Obviously, you've got your board chair on board with that before you present it to the entire board, but it's a totally different mindset and a totally different expectation of what you're going to get back from them. He talks about recurring gifts, and I had a little flashback. I'm interested to know, how many nonprofits today are utilizing recurring gifts. I know it's something that higher education does a really great job in. One of the colleges that I worked for, we launched a recurring gift campaign when I was there, and the monthly amount was affiliated or not affiliated. It was the date the college was founded. So alumni were very familiar with that date, 1883. We asked people to donate $18.83 a month. And then we had it scaled up for larger gifts, different tiers. But it was really successful. It was a really great way for us to engage alumni. And we were able to highlight 1883 club members in our publication. So that gave us another option for stewarding those people. But there can be a lot of benefits to a recurring giving program beyond just the financial aspect that you can almost count on that revenue every month. So he talks about that and how to set those up. He also says when you're getting into your board giving, and to utilize recurring giving for board members too, because they can typically make a larger gift. They might be able to say, well, today I can only do 500, but if I could break it up over the year, I could do 1,000. So giving them that option, can have a significant impact on what their overall giving is. He says, don't suggest a fundraising committee. And like all of these bells and whistles went off in my head of my days of working with fundraising committees as a committee of the board. And I was just like, wanted to just, wave a flag of like, yes, don't suggest a fundraising committee unless your organization is large enough to manage essentially 2 boards, because a fundraising committee can kind of act unto itself. And then it usually takes twice as long to do everything, because you're having to meet with the fundraising committee and talk about what you're going to do for fundraising. And then the fundraising committee then has to present it back to the board and get approval. Then it has to go back to, it's a lot. So I'm glad he and I were on the same page about that. Then he moves into talking about, how to ask for money outside of the board. And one thing that he talks about that I wanted to highlight, because it is really important with grant writing too, is that people give to success. There's kind of this old mantra, or maybe I don't even want to say mantra, like the traditional approach to fundraising was for a really long time that you presented everything in this like doom and gloom scenario. We're not going to be able to do this without your money. We're not going to be, these people will suffer without your money. Without your contribution, XYZ bad thing is going to happen. And, when we present things in a more positive light, you can say all those same things, just flipping them on their head. It's much more successful. There's kind of fundraising psychology around it, that when it's presented in a more positive light, instead of if you don't, then we can't. If you present it in a if you do, then we can perspective, that is much more inspiring to people, because they want to be part of the positive. They don't want to be pulling you up out of the depths of despair. And that's the same is true in grant writing. We're seeing a major shift in that, that grant makers want to see the positive outcomes and outputs and not want to know what are the negative things that are going to happen if they're not part of what you're doing. And he talks about direct mail too. It's funny because I always thought direct mail, I'll date myself even more. I started in fundraising when online donations and e-solicitations and things like that were in their infancy. And at the time when they started going, I remember thinking and talking to my colleagues and saying, well, direct mail is dead. If we can ask people for email, ask people for money through email, and then eventually through text messages and like all of the electronic aspects that we have to do that, then direct mail is gone the way of the dodo bird. And it I think is having a comeback. It's funny because it's like, I feel like my inbox at least is a nightmare. 365 days of the year. That inbox is a mess. But if I get a paper solicitation, and I'm on a lot of lists just because I'm in nonprofit fundraising and I want to see what organizations are doing and how they're presenting their solicitations and things that they're saying. I like to get my clients' direct mail pieces so I can see those too and see what kind of language they're putting out into the world. But when I get those that are for me and they're for organizations that I would want to support, when I get them in the mail, I set them on my desk and set them aside and come back to them and consider them. Way more thought goes into them from my perspective than an email ask, because the email ask, even if I open it now, it's like, okay, yeah, I'll get back to that. Then I close it and then it gets buried under 50 emails by the end of the day. And, I rarely go back to look at it. So I think there might be some value. I think we might be seeing that, email and electronic solicitation, we get birthday stuff, birthday fundraisers on Facebook. We get, all of these bombarded with things on the internet. And, I think maybe that uniqueness now almost of a piece of paper asking you to support the organization might be having a comeback. We'll see.
Well, and you can set those things to automatically, like, I know if I'm writing a letter, let me back all that up. We started solely on recurring donors, like a few grants and things. I've only been with the organization since January, but they started wholly on one-time and recurring donors. So those people like actually believed in the mission. So now to send them something that a chat bot could generate that everybody gets the same thing. Now I'm probably not going to sit down and write, if we had 100 donors, I'm not going to write 100 unique letters, but they know that I took my time to sign my name at the bottom and I addressed the envelope and I put a stamp on it and I put it in. Like, there's, to me, as somebody who gives money, it's meaningful that I'm not just another penny in your bank. Like, you took the time to send me this thing, so you must really need me.
Exactly. And especially with that live signature. And we used to do too, you probably do something similar, but for donors that I recently seen, or if we had an event coming up, just a one-liner of hope to see you at our, we'd have like a donor appreciation breakfast, hope to see you at our breakfast in a couple months, or, just something that even took it beyond just the live signature, even though it was almost that form letter. It was still that I was making that personal connection with the individual beyond just the mail merge document that they were getting, or drop something, put a Post-it note on it. Post-it notes worked really well for us for a while. It was so weird, but we just put a little Post-it note on the letter as we put it in the envelope. And they would mention it. Next time I saw them, people would mention, hey, thanks for your note, or hey, I didn't know the breakfast was coming up, or what, just, it's funny, things like that people remember. And I think you're right.
Any personal touch,
yeah.
I love for myself. So I can only assume that other people appreciate that as well.
Yeah. And that's to me, that's always kind of been my mantra. If I would want to see this as a donor, and he talks about that too in here, like, pay attention to names. People can get their nose bent on a joint about names. And I remember when one of the first organizations I worked for, we'd get people that call and be like, oh, you spelled my name wrong, or you formatted my name wrong. And I'd be like, oh, okay, whatever, we'll fix it. And I wouldn't do that to the donor, obviously, but internally I'm like, whatever, we'll fix your name. And then I got married, and one of the organizations I'd given to before kept structuring my name wrong. And I'm like, come on, I told you, like, I put this in the, they had a little thing, has anything changed? So I would change my name, and I thought, there I am getting my nose bent out of joint about how my name is structured. And he talks about things like that, because again, it, like you're saying, anything like that depersonalizes it. You don't know me enough to know I've been given to you for however long, and you don't know me enough to know that this is how I prefer my name to be, or you can't take the time to put it in your system. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you. And he talks about, like what you just said too, about segmenting out your donors and deciding who are your top donors, who deserves that extra touch, that extra time that you're investing in communicating with them, and how to do that for your organization, because it's going to be different everywhere. A major donor at Habitat for Humanity might be a $25,000 donor, and a major donor at the food pantry down the street from me might be a $150 donor. So, everybody's got to set their own threshold and determine, these are our top, most engaged, most philanthropic donors that we need to have those little extra touches for. One thing he talks about that kind of threw me off, and Becca, I'd love to hear your feedback when you get a chance to read it, was he talks about holding a phone-a-thon. And my very first ever experience in nonprofit fundraising was I worked as a student worker for my college as a phone-a-thon caller. And so I'd come in at night, a bunch of other students, we'd call alumni and friends. And at the time, again, dating myself, it was mostly landlines. So people would, in most cases, pick up and talk to them about, what was going on at the college. Some people thought it was a lot of fun to ask us questions. And I did that for 3 years, 3 of my 4 years in college. And that was a long time ago. And so I was surprised to see him suggest it in this book, which I went back and I was like, when did this come out? And it was published in 2009, but revised in 2012. And I was like, I think cell phones have just killed phone-a-thons. Because I know, again, like Becca, like you said, like turning it on, what would I do? I don't answer calls that are not stored in my phone in most cases. And then, they leave a voicemail. I just feel like it's highly unlikely that somebody's going to return a call of me saying, hi, this is Melanie calling from such and such nonprofit to see if you'd like to support our annual campaign. Like, I don't see that being a return phone call. But I will say, probably it's maybe a little bit, 7 or 8 years ago now. Another college I worked for had really good success with a thankathon where we didn't ask for money at all. And people were really surprised that we didn't. And we were just calling to thank them, tell them a little bit about what was going on, maybe share some opportunities for engagement for them to come to campus and learn something, or if there was a lecture they could come and sit in on or something like that. And tried to really tailor those, particularly for major donors. But we had staff, students, and board of directors calling to say thank you. And we got some surprise gifts out of it. We got a lot of really positive feedback. I know that's something that maybe people might not have the time to invest in if you're small or very small, but something to think about, maybe even if it's just for your top 10 donors every year or top 10% of your donors every year. But it worked really well for us. In chapter 4, he talks about events will kill you. And I agree. Even with the large nonprofits I've worked for, events felt like the biggest time drain. They are such a time suck. And they, if you're small, and they can be so expensive, not just cost wise, like dollar cost, but time wise. And in some cases, we'd have some events where cost was, a couple $100,000, and we're bringing in, we might've brought in $400,000, but really, could we have done that more efficiently with another fundraising revenue stream? And the big gala style events that cost so much money. And we're I feel like the nonprofit landscape is maybe moving in a direction where those things, people understand how much those things cost. And there's a fine line between balancing extravagance with a request to fund a need. I like attending events because I like to learn about new nonprofits in that way. But I also the back of my mind is always like, gosh, what did this cost them? Are they going to make? And, that's a fundraiser in me, I'm sure. But I love his idea in the book about breakfast events. And he talks about how it's a cost savings, how people are more likely to attend because it's first thing in the morning. And I thought, yeah, how many lunch meetings or lunch conferences or whatever have I had to bail on because I went into the office first and something happened and I couldn't go. So breakfast, you go straight there. And then, having, again, just that breakfast is always less expensive than, say, fancy plated dinners. And you can really condense it instead of a 4-hour long gala event with music and dancing and, presentations and stuff. You can condense it to an hour and a half or so and have people in and out, but really still accomplish the same thing. And he goes through step by step of how to set that up too. And I thought that was really helpful. And I'm actually considering I'm working with some consultants here locally where I am to offer an in-person nonprofit conference. And we were thinking about doing it over lunch. And as soon as I read that, I was like, you know what? We should really shift it and we should do it for breakfast, because the same concept would be true. People may be more likely to attend and it would save us some money. One thing that he talks about in chapter 5, the donor pyramid, I thought was really helpful too, to break that down. And it's something that most nonprofit fundraising professionals probably know in the recesses of their minds. If you've done fundraising for a little while, you probably have that, but to build something out and have it be a visual could be so helpful. We do it in grant writing all the time. Of, if we've got a goal to achieve with grant writing, how can we break that up based on average grant amounts for each grantor, and how many of those requests do we need to do based on what we can anticipate as far as rate of return. So same thing of what he's talking about in here, to know, okay, if we need to, if I need 100 new donors, and 5 out of every 10 that I talk to are going to be new donor, these are the numbers, this is the amount of people we need to get in front of. So it's just a good approach to getting your arms around it. And then he says, once you get to that point, that's really an indicator that you're ready for a true donor database. I worked for one organization that had literally 100,000 records in Excel. And when I got there, I was like, this gives me so much heartburn. There's no way to kind of segment it, or, consistency in what's being entered. And so we transitioned to a true fundraising donor database. And it was night and day for our ability to, like you said, Becca, personalize those things. I could pull out everybody that's made a gift of $1,000 or more in the last 3 years and send them one letter, and then pull out everybody that had made a gift of less than $100 and send them a different letter. So it just kind of takes you to that next level. Once you get past that point of survival on one-off donations, every now and then, to where you're really being strategic, it's something that I recommend, and the author recommends too. Start budgeting for that, start planning for that as just an operating expense, because it'll pay for itself. And he says it's a donation, not a purchase, in chapter 5. And I was like, this is really important, because it's talking about, he's referencing benefits, which I know is not the correct terms. We're not supposed to use benefits, but those incentives to give at certain giving levels. We'll send you a t-shirt, or we'll send you a notebook with our logo on it. And those things can just be boat anchors on your ability to be efficient. And, I worked at one organization that all of those incentives, it was so much that we could have probably had a part-time person just to manage that. And it's like, at the end of the day, are we spending more to try to attract these people? And do they care? Are they giving to us because they get a t-shirt, or are they giving to us because they want to be part of what we're doing? Then we move into part 2, which is about building capacity, which is really like what I mentioned at the beginning. He talks about taking what you're doing, your existing fundraising models or strategies, and just building on them. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, or again, shiny object syndrome, where you want to do, let's add an event here and an event here and an engagement thing here. And don't do he suggests just keep it consistent with what you're doing, but your work and your effort should really be to expand those at a comfortable pace. And I think that's important too. There's such high turnover in nonprofit fundraising. I mean, last I saw, we're at about an 18-month turnover rate, which is crazy if you think about it. And I think part of that, though, is that fundraising burnout is real. And if you are, if you think about it, that it's 18 months, that means that you've done one full calendar year probably of nonprofit events and campaigns. And then you get into that second cycle and you're just like, whoa, it's too much. And then you start getting a wandering eye and you go somewhere else and you start it all over again. But I think if the leadership were to consider, let's, let's have attainable goals. Let's stretch, but let's have attainable goals based on the data that we have so that we know we can accomplish those, because there's psychology in that too. If you keep having year after year where you're not making your goals, then, maybe it's not about what you're doing. Maybe it's about your goals. And thinking in terms of, what's achievable for our staff based on how many people we are and based on our talents and our community and, just the feasibility of what you're doing. And then he also talks about, this was an eye opener for me too. Is it easy for people to find how to give to you on your website? Because so many people start there, and I, as a donor, give you about 45 seconds. If I can't find your donate now button on your website in less than a minute, I'm going to check out. And I feel like I probably have a longer window for that than most people. And I just feel like you exist to, obviously for your mission, but in order for that mission to be accomplished, you rely on donations to do that. So never really understood nonprofits that bury the donate now, unless it's that they're uncomfortable with fundraising, but you got to get comfortable with it eventually. And if people are coming to your website to give and you make that hard for them, you're going to lose them. Chapter 7 is my favorite chapter. Obviously, it's about grant requests. And on page 120, he talks about something that's a question that I get a lot. He talks about, should you be looking at other nonprofits that are similar than yours and going through their annual report and seeing who gives to them? And he says he gets pushed back all the time that that's unethical, and that it's absolutely not. It's not unethical. It's smart. Just the way of the world in fundraising. And from my perspective, if you find an organization that, let's say you're a food pantry, and there's another food pantry in the town next to you, and they get money from ABC Foundation, and ABC Foundation supports food pantries. You look at their records, and yep, that's what they do. One, they may be happy to know that you're in the next town, and they can enhance what they do by supporting you. And in my thought, if you are presenting yourself in an accurate way and in the best light you can, and you have a strong case for support, and so does the other organization, then the burden there is on the funder to decide either we're going to support both, we're going to support neither, or we're going to support one over the other. And so that, maybe I'm jaded in my long-term fundraising career, but it's just kind of the way of the world with nonprofit fundraising. And so, it's on the foundation to decide if they're going to continue supporting the one that's, they've been supporting, or if they're going to find a way to support both of you, or whatever they want to do. He also talks about, on page 121, treat foundation staff like they would be your best donor. And I think that's something too that we can feel at the nonprofit level. We can feel really disconnected from foundation staff, and kind of like they're in this ivory tower somewhere, and they've got all this power because they've got the money, and we need the money. And the reality of it is that they are human beings that want to help. They want to serve. They have the money, yes, but we as a nonprofit are doing the work. So all that needs to happen there is a coming together of those two things and making that connection. And you do that through the cultivation and through your grant requests. But we should be treating them just like I always recommend, just like your major donors. If they're open to it, invite them to events, invite them to come and see your facility or your programs at work, and just get them involved, because the deeper that connection is, the more likelihood it is that they're going to continue to support you year after year, just like your major donors. He also gives a great list of questions to ask a grant administrator when you get someone on the phone or an email for the first time, and you're trying to get that information to sort of quantify whether or not you should submit a grant request to them. So there's a great list in there. We've got a list on our website as well, in our online shop, that go kind of drills down a little bit further as almost a script that you can use. And then, based on the answer, the follow-up question that you can ask, just to make sure that you make the best use of your time, because particularly post-COVID, it's hard to get a grant administrator on the phone. So if you can, getting the most out of that time is critical. And you can use these questions in email too, because we see that I tend to get more responses via email than I do for phone. Chapter 8, which is the last technical chapter of the book, he talks about planned giving and capital campaigns. And planned giving always felt like one of those things that we were always afraid to go to even dabble into, because nobody really wants to talk to somebody about what's going to happen to your money when you're gone. So that can be a sticky conversation to have. But I've worked at several organizations that we were a part of their planned giving and their final contributions, and it was transformational money. So I think nonprofits that are not having that conversation are potentially leaving that money on the table. And it can be as easy, he says it in the book, it can be as easy and simple as having a checkbox on your website when someone makes a gift, or maybe even when they sign up for your e-newsletter, or however they're engaging you, just a checkbox that says, I would be interested in talking to someone about planned giving. And if they know what planned giving is and they check that box, then it's not so much of that cold call conversation. They've engaged you in that. And you go into that knowing, okay, they're interested. It's not just me saying, hey, let's talk about your last will and testament to somebody just kind of out of the blue, and making assumptions there. I think that's where the heartburn comes from for fundraising professionals, is making the assumption that that person's going to be like, well, what do you think? What do you think's about to happen to me? There's the running joke in nonprofit fundraising that the best way to live forever is to put a nonprofit in your will. So I always liked to joke, add a little humor to that, to people, because we'd have people say they'd give us planned gifts, and, it could take a long time for that to happen. Hopefully it does. But when you have those conversations with people and they know that they can have a long-term impact, it can be really beneficial to both of you in that philanthropic relationship. You're helping them meet something that they want to accomplish. And, they're helping the nonprofit know that they have that financial stability into the future. And particularly for small nonprofits, he talks about how planned giving and endowments may start off really small, but it helps you build. And if you can set that money away, because particularly planned giving are things you can't count on. You don't know when it's going to come in, and it could change. Somebody could tell you today that your nonprofit's in their will, and then something happened and they change it in a couple of years, and you don't know. So you can't count that money, but if it does come in, then kind of setting that aside and investing it for the growth of the nonprofit, particularly small nonprofits, is really a great way to gain that financial stability again, so you're not living donation to donation. And he talks about capital campaigns. Capital campaigns can kind of be the beast in the nonprofit fundraising room that nobody wants to talk about, or that everybody wants to talk about. Particularly board members love to talk about capital campaigns, but he goes through kind of the basics of capital campaigns and how they can really be hugely cumbersome to small nonprofits. And so many nonprofits that I talk to will get their designation letter from the IRS. They will call me or email me and say, we just got established. We are ready to write some grants and get a building. And I have to be the negative Nancy in the room that says, you're really not. A capital campaign is not something that's going to happen for you in the first probably 5 years of existence, unless you have some really exceptions to the rule as far as major donors go. He suggests, actually, I think he doesn't suggest, he says that you need to have external professional assistance with a capital campaign. Don't try to do it yourself. Get a feasibility study. Let professionals tell you whether or not this is realistic, your goal is realistic. He breaks down the actual cost of raising, I think it's $2 million. The organization says they want to raise $2 million. It's actually going to cost them, they're actually going to have to raise 3.5 million in order to cover the cost of raising the two. So it is a lot. And I think organizations go into that situation sometimes a bit blindly. So he does a really great job of breaking it down. I worked at Emory Emory University here in the Atlanta area, where we were in a $1 billion capital campaign. And if I'm remembering right, it took 6 years. And Emory literally had hundreds of thousands of donors in their database and over 100 years of fundraising experience. So $1 billion is a lot. The fact they did it in 6 years is impressive, but it's still a huge project that's going to take your staff away really from everything else. So anticipating that is important, and he makes really great points about that in the book. So, and he also suggests, build out your annual campaign first. Get your annual campaign really solidified, and then you'll be in a better position when you get there to launch a successful capital campaign. He wraps up the book in a little section called Final Thoughts, how to stay small no matter how big you get. And he says, know when it's the right time to hire development staff and what their role is. The role part of it is kind of my input, but knowing when to hire, he said, when you get to the point where you as the executive director are spending more time in fundraising than anything else, and that you can hire someone to literally just take that over, whether that's a part-time role or a full-time role, but to say, hey, well, I'm devoting 15 hours a week to fundraising, that's a part-time role. We could bring somebody else on and I could do these other things. And on page 137, he makes a really great point as he wraps up. Two really great points, actually. But the first one, he says, you don't have to spend every dollar you bring in. And I think nonprofits think, well, we're a nonprofit by definition, so we can't make a profit, which I think nonprofit staff, particularly ones that are new to nonprofits, translate that to mean we can't have excess money at the end of the year. And that's just not true. You can absolutely have reserves. There's a fine balance between having reserves and having excess that can impact your ability to fundraise. He talks about in the book, if you've got 3 or 4 months of operating reserves, that's stable. And that looks good to a grant maker or to a funder. Like a major donor, to be able to say, yes, we've got these reserves. If something happens, we can continue to exist for 3 to 4 months without any money coming in at all. And that's where an endowment can help you as well. But then he talks about the organization that maybe has, a couple years of reserves built up, that looks excess. And that makes it hard for you to ask for money, because they're going to look at that and say, why do you need money? Like, take some of this out and use it for your program. So there's a balancing act there. He also talks about how, as a nonprofit, it's important to be part of your community and to give back when you can. He talks about the theater that he worked for, allowing local artists to come in and use the theater for screenings for their family and friends. Well, that opened up a whole new pool of individuals who may not have ever had any exposure to the theater, who were physically coming there now. They were seeing the facility. They, their family member had probably talked it up and said, oh, they're letting me use this for free. So it gave a really good reputation for the theater in the community. And that turned into building relationships with new people and kind of getting new names in their pool, and just mutually beneficial beyond just the philanthropic part of being a part of the community, but that it can have ripple effects into your fundraising. So that is my high level, maybe not so high, maybe like mid-level overview of the Little Book of Gold. I really enjoyed it. Amira, I hope that you can provide some feedback as well. I'd love to hear your insight if you've had a chance to read it. And Becca, I'd love for you to keep in touch with me when you get your copy and let me know what you think.
Can you hear me?
Yes. How are you?
How are you, Melanie?
Good to virtually see you.
Yes, I tried to set up a time to talk, and somehow I just didn't go through. It kept saying, retry again. So I think I need to set up a time to talk to you about the contract.
Okay.
What's the best way to do it? Just
Yeah,
bring
I'll
it
send you. I'll
to,
send you an email when we get off of this. But I'm excited that you joined me today, whether it was a fluke in the calendar or not. I'd love to have you be part of this book club. We do this every month. We're actually going to skip December because nobody needs anything extra to do in December. But we've already got the book announced for January. We're going to be reading the Mr. Rogers Effect. And I can send you a link to that book and all the details about signing up. And Becca, I hope you'll join as well. It looks like it's going to be a really fun book to read. It's not necessarily about nonprofit fundraising, but it is about kind of the social impact of being philanthropic on a person-to-person basis and how we interact with each other. And when I read a synopsis of it, I thought how really, I think a lot of that is internally part of who nonprofit professionals are. You don't get into this to get rich or you get into this to do good. And that the author describes using some of the techniques and things that Mr. Rogers used to just relate to people. And I thought that's so kind of cross sections for how we interact with other people on our team, how we interact with people that are utilizing our programs, how we interact with people in the community. And I think would be really helpful just to kind of reinvigorate everybody at the beginning of the new year that what we do as nonprofit professionals is important and that we can really have a positive impact on the world.
great, good.
But yeah,
How do I
I'll
get
send
a
you
copy of
some
the book?
information about signing up for another chat, and I look forward to talking to you. And Becca, I'm excited to have you join us and hope that to see you again at our January meeting.
Very good. How do I get a copy of the book?
I'll send you a link. All the books we're doing, the book club itself, this is a new platform that Amazon has just started, I think within the last couple of months, of setting up kind of virtual book clubs. So there's a few of them out there, and I jumped on it because I love to read and I love to talk about nonprofit fundraising, and the nerd in me just thought the combination of those two things would be perfect. So all of the books will be available on Amazon. I think all of the ones that we've got set up are available audiobook, or, I love old-fashioned paper books, but yeah, I'll send you all the details for that. And then I think that you've signed up. If you've signed up for our e-newsletter and our emails, we usually send out some reminders for it. So and with the links and everything in there. So yeah, I'll make sure you get everything.
Very good. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna still
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Becca. I wish you the best of luck. If there's anything, any resources that I can help you with, as you get settled into your role and move into those, what did you call it? You didn't call them stretch goals. What did you call them?
I don't even remember.
You used a very professional nonprofit fundraising word that sounded like they were large goals.
They're large goals. Let's just call them what they are.
Well, good luck with those, and I'm excited to hopefully have you join us again in the future. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.